Lasso, ani, samalo tashitele, Julie. Dring, tangazo, Joshazo de Carago. Lasso. Dring Josha de Yawaza Homazu. The Piji. Ganam Jishra Tona Marwa. Takanda Harino Menachivamindo. Any Tangazo Dring Ruruk chair. De any Tahas and also Zimze and Rota and Tahas Shed Mare. Any Tangazo draw meeting be Chani, Simjan Tamji. 동해 만들어 대완도 위니치 안에 한가서 담시 지야지 된대로지 차들이 대인자네 나는 가서 일이 좋아 가디 이나 한가서 자와 가르치치와 이나 되니 sembasambu 그런 넘버 타고지 심전 탐지로 펜바다 대화 치들라 뒤주 당야디 한가서 그런 넘버 타고지 자기요리 대송자 아니 가서 드린 주딘 텔라양 아니 가서 담시 지하이 고갑 델라티니 아니 잠블링지 로아르투 심젠 탐지 아니 시데 아니 대완되바 동해만되바 대 탐지로 안데 셈바정부 찬주기 셈 용아쇼 대이체들라 아니 가서 이게 담시 체기 아니 니시 체기세 안데리지 그러나로나.
So at the beginning, I recited a verse, the meaning of which is, throughout the reaches of space, are limitless sentient beings. In order to liberate each and every one of them from that state, I myself must achieve the state. Can you hear? Yes, everyone can hear. My apologies. Throughout the very reaches of space are countless individuals in the state of dukkha or suffering. In order to liberate each and every one of them from that state, I myself must achieve the state of complete and perfect awakening. In other words, to become Buddha. And to that end, I'm now going to kind of practice the sublime Dharma. And this is the kind of opening verse that I read out. Now, with regard to the subject of tonight's talk, I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to be talking about, because usually I just kind of look at the people who come to hear me talk, and then somehow I'm able to communicate something with them based upon that cognition. But I would like, at the outset of our time together this evening, to emphasize that our gathering here is not some form of entertainment, something to pass the time. Rather, we should utilize the time that we have together to reflect upon certain points that I will bring up. We are all sentient beings, and as sentient beings we have the characteristic that we would like to have comfort and well-being, to be happy, if you will, and to avoid its opposite, discomfort, pain, suffering. So all sentient beings have this idea. And so accordingly, when we are gathering together today to discuss the spirituality in general, the teaching of Buddha in particular, it is important to consider that with an open mind, I'm going to listen to these instructions and then put them into practice as much as I can. So with a mind of kind of an altruistic mind, if you will, a mind of a beneficial mind, if you will. Think that I'd like to kind of transform or to change my mind, to train my mind as much as possible, and thereby, both directly and indirectly, benefit all sentient beings. And just this attitude in and of itself is good for the world in general and for all who we may come into contact with, whether it be directly or indirectly.
Laso, dini ngaso tan jocha do zodi, da ngaso lenji, donge mande bada, dewan dewa yinzang, dini di, ani ji dewa kondo pe batang, ani donge me bazoji tap, ani shirap dang, ani ningji, dini di ngaso pechu kante, sitang na ya yung na, dini dini begu yue zi.
So we are sentient in a way that's obvious, but the characteristic of being sentient is, as I mentioned, the idea that, or the desire in a way, to be free of discomfort and suffering, and to acquire its opposite. And in order to get that, what we might call kind of peace of mind, so you might say the kind of path to that inner experience of peace, is something that can be developed within us through the cultivation of both compassion and understanding or wisdom.
Laso, deni tangazo mitse nangla, aniji chuluk laya di karei nai, mirik laya di karei nai, ngaso yimba di mire. Tesongza ngaranso gi nang di zambuling shivu di ngaso gi chimzang nangre. Kangba. Chin zambuling riri shivu di ngaso gi kangba dawzi. Chimzang jikbe kangba dawzi res.
When we consider ourselves as a human being, regardless of kind of religious affiliation, whatever kind of spiritual tradition we may or may not choose to follow. Similarly, without recourse to an emphasis on kind of race, gender, whatever, if we can consider the human element, we are all humans, human beings. And in a way, the world within which we find ourselves is like our house, and we're all kind of one human family, if you like.
Andi hiting la yonjogi semjen tesu tsangmalowa. Ani ngaso pinja nangji, ani jikji la, pe misi dreba yonjo. Den jikji la, jik togu tamsum yonsu soba, ani jikji la ten den badang, ani jikji la drel dewa zik chado res.
If we consider the world, as mentioned, our environment, as like a kind of a house or a home, if you will, and there within all beings, each and every one is like a relative, then naturally, thereby, we will develop a sense of closeness, a sense of family, if you will. The ideas that we are kind of separate or the kind of gaps that we usually adhere to will lessen.
Di tsangmalowa, tangoy nisu nabzi chado rawas.
And in a way, this is simply the way of things, because as all human beings, we should, or rather we are creatures of habit, we are creatures of habit. And if we kind of get together, stay together, thereby we kind of develop a sense of family and familiarity.
Ngasola, ani tsowa dewagi longju chawa karitzi ina, deni jenla ten dewa jangjang rido rawas, ani ji rogo na namdru, modra, aneji, langa, chamalo jurimzi tawaina, mema puchigla tendewa, yonsu zoba chigla tendewa, dewa, che dewa, dendizigi, nichuzi imbade, ngazo ngoshiade, pekichimburewa.
In a way, if we consider ourselves as a singular person, and we may feel that I don't need anybody else, I'm quite content to be on my own. Well, is it really possible to be completely on your own? It isn't, is it? When we consider, for example, travel, whether it be by aeroplane, whether it be by car, bicycle, we travel on roads, the machinery that we use to travel, we're all put together, not by ourselves, but by lots of other people. And so, directly and indirectly, more's the point, indirectly, we have a relationship with others. It may be indirect, more's the point, it may be direct, but the point of the matter is we are individuals who, for our well-being, need to rely upon others. Everything is mutually dependent. We need, as human beings, to rely upon other human beings, to rely upon them, indeed, we depend upon them for our very life.
당외 니슈르 딘디스 임바이나 아니 가츠기 준도 초에토라 낭츠라 아니지 가서 자캅 소소 미릭 소소 줄룩 소소 되니 나이 자캅 나이 낭미 아니 나랑 실라네 아니지 척바 지라완다우지 주 짐바기 찡니 셈데지 남도 용어라 숙쳔보 진로되유로와.
So that's the nature of things. This mutually dependent way of being. We can pretty much understand that relatively easily. But is that the way things appear to us? It isn't, is it? When we look at the world and we interact with the world, whether it be directly or indirectly through the television, whatever, therein we find great kind of reasons to disassociate ourselves from others. For example, we can say, oh, I'm from this country, I'm not from that country. A sense of nationalism can kind of take over oneself and cause us to push others away. Similarly, when it comes to race, similarly when it comes to gender, similarly when it comes to religious or spiritual tradition, etc., there are myriad ways within which we can distance ourselves from others. And these ideas, when we give them credence, when we allow them to kind of take over our being and we reify them and kind of adhere to them, then it causes us, our family, if you like, human family, if you will, to kind of fracture and fragment.
안 된지 이제네 안 가서 욕자 줘야 매바지 아니 강에 줘야 매바지 아니지 내가 대화 줘야 되는지 가두가두가 나 준로야 할 레벨 강에 줘야 매바지 차디기로 봤어.
And so this kind of fragmentation, through whatever reason, is something that is, you could say, kind of troublesome in a way. Directly and directly and indirectly, it causes us difficulty. It causes tensions. It causes a sense of being ill at ease. How is that to endure? It is something that is very unpleasant. It is something that kind of takes over our being to the point that even though we would like to have happiness, even if we're able to develop some kind of peace, it is something that is temporary.
세상 가서 너희들이 망보지 삼는 땅와이나 나라야 가서 주부대야 이나양 아니지 니수니 수보라야디 가서 파마이 쿠라 니는 접대봐 되니 림베기 아니지 주제 망보지라 또그 당선에 때네 가서 찬우제 집에 뒤라 다르비 뒤라 개비 뒤라서 딘디지 안에 로데야지로.
So again, if we look within using the tools of introspection, we reflect upon ourselves and we say, I am this, I am that, I have this, I'm not that, etc. The idea of an independent identity appears relatively easily to us through the sense of familiarity. But if we simply look at the nature of things, we look at within, look at ourselves, we look at our kind of aggregation that makes up our being of body and mind. Well, if we look at the body, it is something that is the product of our parents. So we can say it's the kind of product of the fertilization of an egg through a period of gestation. We were born and we've grown up. And so in a way, the idea of being something independent is at odds with the way things actually are.
Then, 맞아 심 라야지, 남시 라야지. 딱 한다 심 라와이나라, 남시 라야나라. 안 되니디, 다 밤에 쿠라이 디나라. 안 대체네 밤에 쿠라이 대체네. 안 맞으기 지 서로와 대뚝 소리하기. 다 남시 라와이나라, 심 라와이나라. 지 로가지 그러면서.
Now when mention was made of our being as the umbrella term for the aggregation of body and mind. So we understand that the body is something that is, as mentioned, the product of our parents. But what about consciousness? This is something that is beyond the material, if you will. Mind, when we look for mind, what does it do? How does it function? It is something that is in the nature of awareness. It is aware of and feels, for example, pleasure, pain, and so forth. And this mind is something that relies upon the body, but is not an integral part of the physical.
대선자 아니 가서기 셈라야다 남실라야 디 아니 뭐니 째와 토마메바니 아니 마음발라 아니지 가르주다 탐마메바지 로데니 지레도와.
So consciousness or mind in and of itself is something that is in the aspect, if you like, of a stream. And where is this carried on from? We can say since it is carried on since beginningless time. So mind in and of itself as a stream is something that we experience and have experienced since beginningless time.
다 니가랑가서 서로와 디ting 박차 뭐지? ngari 박차 뭐지? 단다 박차 샤사 마음발라 아니 박차기 땡로지 시사지 레디기도와.
So as mentioned, consciousness gives rise to a particular kind of experiences, feelings, if you will. And these, through repeated experience, we become somewhat habituated with them. When we develop a particular like or dislike, feeling for this or that, etc. And this is something that kind of leaves an imprint on us. An imprint in the sense of driving us towards a particular thing, driving us away from another, etc. So this is what we call, in the Buddhist technical language, then the kind of imprints left within the mind.
다 이지 셰바 라고 말해 디기마 양 주전라오지 예나 도그면서는 된지 엉부라고 해서 자와치 되지 칼라마 내가 차디기도 와.
So when mention is made of consciousness, consciousness is something which is in and of itself quite subtle, but nevertheless, as the kind of body develops, kind of consciousness moves along with the body, and then what develops are what are generally known as the five sense consciousnesses, or the senses, if you like. And relatively, we can talk of five sense consciousnesses and one mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is something that is more subtle than the five sense consciousnesses.
대상 아니 지 류초르기 동행지당 류초르기 대화지 류 아니 지 셈소르기 동행지당 셈소르기 대화지세 타라 몸부지 용초야 된다.
And so, for example, if we take an object of the sense consciousnesses, perhaps we see something, and based upon the object that we see, then we'll have an experience of pleasure or pain. So the perception takes the kind of characterizing, I like, I don't like, takes place within the mind, not within the sense consciousness.
덴디게 아니지 족자 치로 레자 왕부 ngadi 아니 양 공다마 니 쿠로드 이지 남시티가라 바 드르도아.
So in a way we can look at and understand the kind of shutting down of the five sense consciousnesses when we sleep. When we go to sleep, the five sense consciousnesses kind of dissolve, if you like, or merge with them, the kind of innermost subtle mind, mental consciousness, if you will. It's as if, as the saying goes, they're in sleep mode.
제가 아니 가서기 지 치지 자와저지나 심감 원감 리바데 의니시 기숙다트르기 유파 젠바른 제사이지 숙다트르지 여대바지 델라디니 셰바 이지 셰바 카르조르 왕모락바 셰바지 여대바지 디기 젤레디기 안에 아니 원감 리바세나 의니시기 시샤 동년지다 의니시기 아니 가서지 숙다트르 렉샤지 여대로와 원감 리바.
And so we can, as I mentioned, when we look at the world, we look at the objects of the senses, whether they be form, whether they be kind of tastes, smells, tactile sensations, sounds, whatever. So these are things that we perceive and that we kind of like or we dislike and we kind of go towards or we try to avoid, etc. But these are all objects that, generally speaking, linguistically, we can say exist kind of externally, in a way, and we can investigate them to see what their makeup is and how we relate to them in terms of mutual dependence, bringing about experiences as aforementioned.
대송자 다 심가 리바이 띵네 아니 가솔라 야제 땅야 시랍 카체야 지당 아니 디 원감 리바데 배주 간디스 지고메 아니 지 가서 So we understand then the objects of the five senses, how they function. And then if we start to investigate the nature of those objects, we can kind of find out how they work together. We can understand their particular makeup, what is useful, what is not useful. We can start to put things together in particular ways, etc. And thereby we build what we can call the material world. So it's important to understand the material world and to develop within the material world, to develop it for our own well-being. This is something that is extremely important. I'm sure you'll agree. 당아서 니레 좋아 라바인드라 미치나라 아니 롭종이 남에 나서 용수 쪽어디 다조 원강리바이 초라 망한다지 차대기도 와 아니지 이거 야제당야 누구 죽주체야 아니지 저거서야 다 할리비 체통부지 원강리바디 체통부지 차이로.
And so if we look at our lives, as you know, we are persons who have at least kind of a basic education. And within our education, we learn certain subjects so that we can interact with the external world in a proper way. And through that interaction, we learn to kind of manipulate the material world. The point of this manipulation, if you like, or the development, if you will, of the material world is to make it better, in a way, to make it more comfortable, if you prefer, to move perhaps a little bit faster, with a little bit more comfort, in a mode that is somewhat easier, etc. And so this then is the development of our education, the development of a person's education rather, and based thereupon, or rather therethrough, we have then the development or the betterment, if you will, of the material world.
딘디지 또그 땀, 다 딘디기 튠제 용수 쪽이지, 아는 거 저기 신노 뭐지 야제 땅야지 여들와.
And so again, when we reflect upon this education, it is something that brings about then the betterment of the world. It is something that develops materially, if you like, the betterment of the experience of human beings.
이나양다 류소라 아니 디주이 뱀미시 핀도당 아니 가절로 그거 자친부지 차려와.
So whether this be in whatever the realm this may be in, for example, in the realm of medicine and so forth, this is something that is extremely important and we shouldn't be kind of negated or kind of left to one side.
세상다 딘디기 롭중 제사나라 아니 셈 장보 제사라 장보 라야다 아니지 그 양보 라야 제바 첨보 닝제 첨보 학삼 첨보 아니 에지 시디기 준당이 셈게 아니 가지고 롭중데 디나라 빼 뉴뉴레도와 남주 롭중나.
So the point I'm getting to is when we think about education in general, education is something that focuses upon external development, the development, if you will, of the material world. But as mentioned, when it comes to introspection, to looking within, to looking at the one who experiences the material world, if you will, education to then bring about a peace of mind, if you will, to bring about a kind-heartedness, to bring about a kind of altruistic attitude, to make a person kind of decent, if you like. In other words, a kind of path to peace, path being then the experience of kind of peace, is something that has been rather left to one side.
내가 가서 롭중 야고 되니 내가 야고 아니 배샤 망보 안 딘데 튕진 간듯은 정말이나 이나양 아니지 나저기 아니 줄라 아니지 가지고 동해 상말로와 매바조 두기면도.
And so, in this light, we educate ourselves, we educate our children and so forth. And the reason for this is we say if you're well educated, you'll get a good job. And why do you want a good job? Because you'll get a good salary. If you have a good salary, then what? Oh, then you'll be happy. Okay. So if that is the way of looking at the world, great. But it doesn't always end up with happiness as the experience of the person who has a good salary through a good job.
대성자 아니 대체 자침보 같이 여와 있나 아니 가서기 동네 라야다 아니지 가지고 그러다 대차 라야다 셰당 라야다 디묵 라야다 낙심 라야다 뇌심 라야다 록다 차도 강다 남도 덴지데 용수 저바지 아니지 매바조 탑라 아니 배샤다 주너다 같이 자침보였나 디게 매바조 투기면도 배샤 주너 째네 맞어 매바조 투야면도.
Again, to use introspection, we think about that which really agitates us, agitates our mind, if you like. We can think of obsession with something, desirous attachment, if you will. Similarly, we can talk about revulsion, or kind of anger, pushing something away. Similarly, confusion, the idea of wishing to harm another. Similarly, we can think about misunderstanding or a dullness of mind that causes us to shut off from the world, if you will. Similarly, jealousy, pride, etc. There are numerous ways to describe these very destructive mental traits, emotions, if you will. Now, if we understand that the experience that we have that is other than a peaceful state of mind, an agitated state of mind, if you will, comes about through entertaining these emotions. Well, regardless of how much money we have, similarly, regardless of how many things we have, gadgets, whatever, we are unable to, at the flick of a switch, make these emotions vanish. We cannot rid ourselves of these destructive or negative mental traits just like that.
대성자 아니 가서다 semgang ribadi yarje dang de shindu kechi mu zin sarwa.
Accordingly, it is extremely beneficial and useful to develop the science of mind.
Semgang ribadi la yang namjudo nga so la shirap ze yoderwa.
To develop a science of mind, we need an understanding, right? Wisdom.
Di shirap di nyamdo la ane nga so nyumu tan re de bi shirap ze da nga so semgi ting la ane nyumu mandeli shirap za chimbu ze ane nga so gi mi ye da namju shirap khache ba ina ta nyumu mandeli bi shirap phydu chunga ze khache ya yode bari rindoa.
So this understanding, what we might call a kind of correct understanding, is often called wisdom. Now, there are various kinds of wisdom, as you can imagine. But if we really understand the kind of nature of things, this particular wisdom that people talk of developing is something that, if correctly understood, digested, if you will, something that will, in a moment, cause all of these negative states of mind, all of these destructive mental traits, if you like, those which cause us to be agitated, if you prefer, to, in the moment, lose their hold over us. Their kind of bondage, finding ourselves tied by them or under their boot, etc., is simply gone, provided, of course, we hit the spot with that understanding.
Namju nga zo midila ani ji tawa jepa la ya zero te songzang teni ji shirap nyumo jenda ani karzoro di ani tawa chinjilo de jepa chinjilo de chayu gudwa.
So we talk of two words, view and conduct. View can also be translated as outlook. And conduct is then simply a way of interacting with the world or with ourselves in a way. If we experience dissatisfaction and difficulty, it's because we really have a kind of, what we might say, a kind of, to use the Buddhist technical language, a wrong view. Or we're looking at things in a slightly kind of a contrary way to the way they actually are. And the same with the conduct, because the conduct is simply a reflection of our outlook or view.
Di chulugi kesharimi do nga so rangji rangche so yode bazirwa.
This is the nature of things. It's nothing to do with spirituality.
Te songzang da tawa chinjilo da jepa chinjilo yagi nedang de an jing jendang ro di khandro ze yores. Da khandro ze go silana. Ta di nga so 지 따와디 친지로 자네 아니 수수 차당 숙침부 슈지차 아니 가서 뭐에 니수당 숙침부 증겐 심전 탐지 너바 대화당 아니 동해 만들 버리더라 봐 가서 겐도 갑라 아니지 미 망부지 아니 녀기 도시 미 망부지 심지 망부지 드라인 도시 심지 망부지 따뇽이 도시지 차용도 다가랑기 아니 가서 셈디 출찬도와.
And so, if, to use this kind of technical language, a wrong view, wrong conduct, etc. So, the question we should ask then, well, we're always going to have an outlook. We're always going to perceive the world in a particular way. So if you are suggesting that the way we are looking at it is incorrect, then can it be corrected? And what is the way of correcting it? Well, when it comes to kind of outlook or the way we perceive the world, the idea of being isolated, completely kind of independent from the world around us, is this kind of mistaken view. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we are mutually connected with the world. And so accordingly, when we consider sentient beings, as mentioned, we are all the same in that we would like to experience kind of happiness and avoid suffering. We would like comfort as opposed to discomfort and so forth. When we consider how we interact with the world at the moment, there are those who we feel particularly close to and we pull them towards us for whatever reason. Similarly, there can be those who we feel an aversion toward, and we tend to avoid them at best, or actively kind of push them away, push them away at worst. So this then is the mistaken way of view, one of the mistaken ways of viewing the world, thinking that one is isolated from others.
Tela dene 차단기 로 숙심보지 맞아 gen도 차단 로 숙심보지 dene 니레 처하면 미치 소가노라 강력라 주마치서 되기로.
And so based on this idea that we're somehow independent, then we act. And based upon that action, we engage, we put ourselves in a position where we become quite miserable.
저기 미유더버지나 아니 수수 낭미치도 수수 된다 끼고 아니 배미유 자춘주 아니 텔레데니 차당 숙침보 아니 되바 대바이나 아니 용야 동행 바지 용대바지 다 세미나 구수도보 아니 축초주 세랑랑 주주 아니 지 가르 이나다 강들 지 만유바지 차디기로와.
So how does this manifest? In a way, it's something that we're all quite familiar with. So we want the best for ourselves or somebody we feel particularly close to. And based thereupon, then we kind of become a little bit kind of introverted in a way. My or our kind of happiness or well-being, comfort if you will, takes precedence over another. Therefore, I'm going to engage in particular activity that will bring about my happiness, so I believe. And we kind of, with this way of kind of self-protection or self-isolation in a way, thinking that by acting in such a way, we will have this happiness that we so desire, what happens is we kind of entertain these destructive or negative states of mind. Attachment, aversion, and so forth. Thinking that this will bring us the happiness or comfort we so desire. But what happens? Actually, it's not that. What happens is that we start to agitate the people around us. We find that our own kind of well-being is somewhat done away with. We become ill at ease, uptight, if you like, easy to anger, easy to agitate. And all of this in the name of, if you like, trying to have happiness for oneself alone.
다 시럽 뉴모진라기 대냠도 뉴모연조지 셈데 너주 대가서는 다 마노로바 시럽디 가르저여레스 라나 아니 왜 니수 통통니 시샤 참지로 아니 띵용기 랑신 안에 아니 저단 리브 튠빙 안에 가솔라 장보다 님보지기 아니 리브민디야지.
And so I mentioned this development of wisdom. And so this kind of wisdom, what is it? There are various kinds of understanding. Wisdom simply means to understand, doesn't it? And so then, wisdom that we should simply try to develop, one that will naturally bring with it a sense of well-being, etc., is to simply understand the nature of things. To understand that there is nothing that is independent, rather everything is mutually dependent. Nothing is independent, everything depends upon something else. This is simply the nature of things. And it is this that we should just try to be open towards.
제장랑기 낭수당 니수인인데 백겐도 숙정부시고 임바지 하거나 나서 항상 차당한테 매봤으니 샘 메시지 자신부터 차들어와.
So there is to use the kind of Buddhist technical language, is the way things are and the way things appear. The way things are is mutually dependent, dependently arisen, if you will. And simply then, the way they kind of appear is somewhat other than that. So they are a little bit in discord with one another. And so it's important to then understand the way things actually are, as opposed to the confused way that we tend to perceive things. If we're able to do so, then our mind, far from becoming uptight, far from becoming small, rather expands, so to speak.
Then rangi miyuna jin zambuling chila pendea. Chiso chila pendea. Ane mitsa chembo mi yengi na gawo chea. Ane suzuki le karzuru dan dribu ina hali bizabo. Ane simnola deji ina ane ji yongsu zogba ji genki tumni. Ane ji karzuru da shuk chembo lagu mare simnola kari ina ane shang tumni. 간님바 가르즈요나 치님바 남주 가르즈 임바이나 용시바레 띵중르와 네 주제 때니 만부지기 주단지 초유 토네 죽드라만다 드라만다 초완드라만다 두신드라만다 용초와리 진 셈데 소시 시데네 디니 용단데서 셈데 난간난신지 데나 용단데서 아니 찜바 난신지 고 내단지 루브르바지 통기로 왔어.
So to understand the way things actually are, as opposed to our misconception about things, is extremely useful. If we look at the world in general, understanding the mutually dependent nature thereof, having that kind of inner experience, what then happens is that our whole kind of being, in a way, kind of transforms. Rather than being kind of isolated, one rather opens, if you like, to the world. And along with this openness comes this a natural kind of sense of joy, of altruism, of empathy and concern for others. For within this experience, there's no longer any fear. No longer any fear in the sense that through understanding the nature of things, one's mind simply opens to that. And within that experience, well, that experience could simply be called happiness or bliss, if you will. What we've encountered at this point, or what we're experiencing, is simply the way things actually are. As I mentioned, everything, indeed, when we consider everything that we encounter, it is not anything, it is not something that is independent. No matter how it appears to us. If we think about its parts or its causes and conditions, etc., we see that it is a coming together of parts, of causes and conditions, etc., and something then appears. Perhaps it appears to our eye, and we see it and we think, I like it, I don't like it, etc. But the like and the dislike no longer has any control over us, because we see the mutually dependent nature of things in its subtlest level between the subject and the object. Once we've seen that, we understand that the idea that something is inherently this or that vanishes. And what is left in its wake is this openness of mind, which is in the nature of contentment, bliss, if you will. If we use a metaphor, when the clouds kind of scatter, the sky is vast. So similarly, when the ideas of things being independent, small, over there if you like, are removed, what is left in the wake thereof is the openness of awareness.
딘리지 시럽디 아니 가지기 배주 땅와이나 아니 뺨메시 통자 친구들 할리빈 준당 친구들와.
So if we're able to develop this understanding, this wisdom, not as a kind of intellectual pursuit, but as something subjective, we're able to have that for ourselves, then, as mentioned, our mind becomes big. This is simply the opposite of keeping it small, so to speak.
Chezang nga zu zukta thero da burzi yinba yina ngone ji zambuling khangina changmalowa perezina zambuling korang dönche chame nangge yingna la dul chini ji jongang ni chungane ko trin de bazi da an semje ji de kham da meba da de na chubi ye tende chajin ji ki trin de bazi thonsong yina Dinaji rangi zubo. Ani dinaji rangi sem yongsu zobe ge ngoy ni chu je thongba ina. Tende hajang ge chadang je goya dang. Gawi ani ji kharzo nga zo je ga na chi dongin la ya zo ro. Ani dinde la chara jikwa chi goya yo maris.
Again, if we have this or develop this wisdom, the world doesn't vanish. We are still going to interact with the objects of the senses, forms, sounds, smells, taste, tactile sensation, etc. We're still going to kind of walk the earth, so to speak. When we think about the earth and the various ways that its nature appears to us, we can understand its kind of atomic or molecular structure. Similarly, we can consider the coming together of the elements in particular ways, etc. Again, through understanding the mutually dependent nature of things, we understand how certain individuals will have certain thought habits. We can understand how others who we interact with have developed particular outlooks on life, the way they view the world, etc. We understand that it's not an inherent trait that a particular person has to have, but rather it is something that has been developed. As such, we do not react to it as a thing, but rather we simply see it as a product, something that is dependently arisen, not something that is independent, that can be simply kind of removed, because everything is interdependent. This is simply what is meant by seeing the nature of things. And by seeing said nature, again, formerly we were looking at something relatively small, but now we've removed that kind of focusing in and adhering to something existing tangibly over there. The result of that is that one's mind, as mentioned, becomes vaster. When it becomes vaster, and metaphorically vaster obviously, within that, a sense of joy, a sense of contentment, happiness, naturally wells up. Why? Because its opposite, fear, apprehension, etc., is simply released in the moment.
Dende ani shirap zachimbu pecho tangswa ina ani namju shedang langsada chadang ani dasha jesa ani chamri sem shum ani susula majiwa yungyanda ani je khandar chik lul nasa thakshi da la soba leya da tenji rik changmalola ani shirap de pecho tang du yungsi bare chen shedang longju chabla an khongyu ni su thongyu du khola yingji je ya 아니 콜라 쇠바 지야다. 콜라 락삼 지야다. 딘데 인간이 남주를 로가식 되는 거로 왔어. 고라 동행기 남주들 추샤리 있나. 겐티바 있나. 이나 양디 시랍 디 배셔 땅외 젠신에 디 대외 몰라. 심 고양보. 쇠바 전부 락삼 전부 닝덥 전부 점진 시비 토네 코랑시 이강에 대 시루로 왔어.
This understanding then of the nature of things is something that is extremely precious. It's something that is precious and useful to us. It is something that is precious because of its usefulness to us. How is it useful to us? Well, as I mentioned, if we look at these negative traits of mind, these destructive or disturbing, if you will, emotions, they all arise in dependence upon this fundamental distortion of reality. If we remove that distortion and we simply see things as they are, there is no longer any room for these disturbing emotions to come about. If these disturbing states of mind, negative mental traits, etc., are not in play, that which they bring about through their very nature, agitation, sadness, depression, whatever, on the physical level, blood pressure, etc., this naturally fades away. How? Because we simply understand the nature of things. For example, if we're confronted with something, whatever form that thing may take, we're able to then understand its nature. We can understand, for example, in the case of an animate individual, another person, if you will, they attack us, for example, we understand where their hostility comes from. Understanding it, we are able to see, again, mutual dependence. Through seeing this mutual dependence, the nature of things, as a byproduct, a sense of compassion, concern, altruism naturally wells up from within. This is simply the effect of what we might call using this wisdom, seeing things through this particular outlook. And thereby, we bring about our own well-being, because to utilize this particular understanding, this wisdom, if you will, what we gain thereby for ourselves is a sense of well-being. We have this subjective experience, if you like, that has gone beyond the kind of mundane, limited way of looking at the world. And we see things in a vaster, more broader sense. This is, of course, then the correct way of using wisdom. So we can talk of wisdom concerning understanding the obvious, understanding something that is a little bit hidden, understanding something that is obvious, understanding various things. And so when it comes to the understanding of things, if you like, we can understand the obvious kind of makeup of the world, things that are obvious to us, if you like, manifest phenomena, if you will. Then there is something that is hidden, we can understand indirectly. And then there are things that are completely hidden from our ordinary way of viewing or partaking of the world. So understanding that all of these ways that kind of things abide, obvious, slightly obscured or hidden, extremely kind of hidden, understanding that all of their nature is something that is mutually dependent, the subjective experience of that is naturally vast. This is simply then the nature of things. Now, when one has this understanding, when one has this understanding, this wisdom, if you like, and
라야디 체진지 차도리스
Yes.
아니 주진 슉 첨부지기 코 백겐도스 또르그리스 메와조르그리스.
So when we have this understanding, or you might say, when we put this wisdom into to use, if you like. So when we understand the nature of things and we remain within that understanding without trying to kind of manipulate it, what comes from that experience? We talk of conduct. So here it's important to understand that the way we conduct ourselves physically, verbally, and mentally is a reflection of what we might say our innermost experience. And so if we have developed this understanding, this realization, dare I say, within us, thereby, through familiarity, the effect of that upon us will be seen through our conduct. So our conduct will, like our perception of the world, will no longer be something that is kind of, in a way, blinkered by confusion, distorted by ignorance, if you will. Rather, it'll be the opposite. What does it mean when I say the opposite, the experience of wisdom? It means then the natural welling forth of compassion, concern, altruism, and so forth.
파마냠들은 참디 침자냠들은 제와 부바로라 제와 초보 주무바로라 제와 디 제와 디 냠들은 뉴몬제와 인장코 체진리들이스 아니 까브리 메 메바마세 까브리 아니 코라 닌데 자양 차로리스 지지 찍라 삼데 고 준루그리스 템보요 마레스.
So when we consider the experience, when we talk of love, compassion, concern, empathy, altruism, and so forth, all these wonderful words, we can talk about them in light of a loved one, family member, for example, between the parents and children and so forth. Similarly, we can consider that between extended family, friends, and so forth, and reaching out from that. But if this is something that is without kind of wisdom, without this understanding, it is something that is, with what we might say, kind of temporary. It's temperamental in a way. On a good day, it might be there. On another, it may not be.
근데 이게 아니 뉴모님도 여봐 이게 제와당 이치 라야디 뉴모 코랑 아니 제단기 고 짜마시바지 왜 니주단 gen도 직차 인장 아니 니녀가 진이 들어왔어.
And similarly, if we talk of something that may appear to us, and indeed we may even consider ourselves as being a loving and concerned person, empathetic to the needs of whomever. However, without introspection, if we simply put on the mask of being a kind of concerned individual, it may be that because said seeming concern, love, compassion, and so forth is mixed with these destructive states of mind, addiction, obsession with whatever that may be, then by the very nature of those emotions, the experience will not be something that endures. It is something by its very nature that is disturbing and temporary.
얘는 시럽 표도 중앙데 표주 당와이나 아니 뉴몬데 로르인 바하고 그랬어. 아니 뺨메시 고 레라오지 가르조로고 부장 링보스키에 말했어. 그 로브르 임바 하거나 고 빵주여 봐도 고 매바조주 임바 하고 그랬어. 내 나이 시당 더샤 내 참말로와 아니 쥐임바 하고 그랬어. 아니 고 출대바 임바 하고 그랬어. 내갑 잠제 임바 하고 그랬어. 대 내갑 잠바 임바 인장 아니 시당당 아니 더샤다 디즈데 내갑 잠 임바 마세 아니 거기 어디 거기 랑진데 거 템바 줍대바지 뉴모 낙딩지 여 말이스 로이 즈니 짐바기 찡니 남도이 즈니 자와지칼 모충리스.
So again, reflecting upon the mutually dependent nature of things, this understanding of the nature, if you like, of the world, of everybody who abides in it and so forth. To put this to use. What does that mean, again, on the subjective level, if we look within, using introspection and so forth? We can see that these negative mental traits, these negative states of mind, are not part and parcel of who we are. Indeed, they are not us, if you like. They are something that appear based upon our perception of something, and they appear to wish to kind of help us in a way. But when we really look at them, they are doing exactly the opposite. So, for example, in the moment we may give into kind of hostility, we may give into kind of desirous attachment, or obsession about something, wishing to possess it and what have you. But these emotions, in this instance, these emotions, anger, hostility and so forth, are something temporary. Nevertheless, when they appear, we do kind of tend to think that they are something true, something that is really there, kind of tangibly, kind of a part of us in a way. But really, they are just the kind of the product of our confused mind. But the problem is, when we experience the world, and in particular when it comes to kind of ideas that we have about it, there is the habit that we've gotten over a very long period of time that when experience occurs, when emotion is in the realm of our experience, at that time we then kind of adhere to that. We kind of project a sense of autonomy onto it, and then we simply remain within that state. But the nature of things is, as I mentioned, completely the opposite. Everything is mutually dependent. There is nothing independent. The idea of independence is something man-made. It is something fabricated by the mind. And to follow it is simply then to go against the nature of things and therethrough to restrict oneself.
Lo chuba di pesho dang du ngazo ba mi chi shedang chabulang. Teni namjur ngemba. Teni tsik zubo. Takju dokja. A changma nang chimjang majiwa rangi lu ani karjuguru da jungji chukdeba. Ani ji chokwa nona. Ani mambo chigla 쮸마도 연대 요 말했어. 네 하고 그랬어. 쮸마도 연대 매바 존인데 소리잖아. 아니 랑기 남도 찡대와 뉴몰라에 아니 셈 누르젠데. 차와 송장 시럽 디게 삼노 땅와이나? 안디 참말로와 삼노 코용도 아니 고 셰단한 거 말했어. 아니 델라테니 닝제제 그랬어. 델라테니 수바지 그랬어. 남주인기 세와 디 낭지 말했어. 아니 제와디 초그리메비 제와 체메비 제와 부글라이나다 아니 소소 침장라이나다 총바 침제라이나다 아디 레갈레사 이나다 자캅비 이나다 카리냠도 제와이나 데고 베 초리바 작 말이스 체신 작 말이스 체메와 코심 고양보 아니 셰랑기 주장도 아니 콜라 닌지 차르스 아니 콘트롤라야다 딘디기 차도 렌심 데니지 심마지바 심슌바 니수가 레용도 시라 배주 당도 대참말라 닌지제야 쇠바제야 학삼제야 아니 배 코르 추바 지 기닝 저우즈 통도 그랬어 딜지 착바다 셴바 민도 아카 닌제 제야 지인자네 바로 후디 아니 되샤랑데야다 바로부디 셰당랑데야다 바로부디 직심 누르지 배주체와 하고와 대가랑라 고 바로부디라 운내니지 제 그랬어 고 셰당 디기 코로나 맞이와서 그래 제가 맞이와서 그래 좀젠다 디뱅안에 아니 콜라니지 제 그랬어 콜 제와데 약슈레스 디 제와데 아니 민 준당 침보 런당 침보 창마지 그지 제사인다 랑게 초라리나 초바 동행이 릭즈 테바이나 소소 초바 대왕 바식 차고 때 캡상 쉬운 말을 했어.
So we've mentioned this fabrication of autonomy, whereas the actual nature of things is kind of mutually dependent or dependently arisen. So with the idea that things exist in and of themselves is, in a way, the fundamental distortion of reality. It is the actual distorting kind of factor, if you will. And if you'd like to see, at least conceptually, how this leads to the development of destructive or negative emotion, and under the influence thereof, to action, we consider something, regardless of what form that may take, something that we don't like perhaps. And when we perceive it and we think, I don't like that, under that influence we then start to say the reasons to ourselves, and we convince ourselves that the thing that we find unattractive about the particular object is over there. And there's nothing wrong with us pointing to it and saying, this is no good. This is bad. And I'm right to think about it in this way. And something very small becomes something very, very big. Indeed, it becomes something blown out of all proportion. And so if in the moment, through the force of familiarity, we've understood the nature of things, we understand the mutually dependent nature of things, we have that wisdom in play, if you will. We are wise through having this understanding, if you will, if you prefer. Then, when we are faced with difficulties, when we kind of are faced with for example, somebody who's kind of aggressive towards us, or somebody who is causing us some harm or difficulty, etc., rather than reacting to that thing that we don't like and blowing it all out of proportion, thereby causing the particular scenario to increase, if we understand the nature of things, this gives us, in the moment, a very open, clear mind. We're no longer kind of focusing in on something that's not even there, reifying it, and kind of acting under its influence. Rather, in the moment, we are looking at the nature of things, and this allows our mind to remain open. Within that, we see how another, the person who is perhaps confronting us, is focusing on something, and again, he himself or they themselves are blowing it out of all proportion. So at that moment, understanding the nature of things, we see how another, through being blinkered, or rather blinkering themselves from the nature of things, is causing their own, in the moment, mental discomfort, agitation, suffering, if you will. At that moment, it is said that a genuine compassion wells up for the first time. We talk of these words, love, concern, compassion, etc. But at that moment, when one sees how the lack of this understanding, the lack of wisdom is really that which brings about all the difficulties that each and every sentient being, regardless of their particular form, experiences. At that moment, a genuine kind of universal love, concern, and compassion arises. And we shouldn't think that this kind of love, compassion, concern, however we like to phrase it, is somewhat limited. It isn't. It is, like the wisdom itself, as I mentioned earlier, is vast, like the sky which is free of clouds. That is our experience. As this is our experience, our mind is naturally at ease, relaxed, on a very deep and fundamental level. It is at this point then, within this understanding, that no matter what the object that we perceive, no matter what we interact with, these destructive emotions which have their root in this distortion, because we've removed this distorting faculty, the distortion, if you like, we simply see reality as it is. So therefore, these disturbing emotions no longer have any hold over us. They cannot bind us any longer. When we see how others are bound through adhering to this fundamental distortion of reality, then, as I mentioned, it's at that point that a genuine compassion, altruism, patience, etc. arises. It isn't something that is mixed with a particular outlook. So, for example, as I mentioned, if you kind of mix disturbing emotions with these kind of positive states, they become, of course, temporary, but they're not genuine. Ultimately, they will lead to dissatisfaction for oneself. And so accordingly then, when we consider how to kind of uproot all of these disturbing emotions, how to generate all of these positive qualities, this is something that is entirely possible simply through seeing the nature of things. And this is something that is extremely useful, don't you think?
And chuluk dramanda rida, kunju chinanda, ninanda, kunju tizugi, gomba nola ngasola mahasunyala, chiranzo mixum, and chiranzo ngala reva chesho, ni chiranzo deba sama kango lamni, kunju suchi mido. And chiranzo parchu sama, chiranzo kangi sama ngi dogo, salamni suchi mido, kunju tizu kanta sungsha. Dipa machis. Dikpa sena kharse ore. Simje la nö ma jis, jen la nö ma jis. Pemba chis. Pemba chi, jen la nö ba ma che da, chiran nönru ma che da, chirangi debu yabu togures sungruwa. Di sungdo. Ngaso samno di nönru zike mikzum ane gonjo che parcho daro si tunjen dero chi sena haleba ngaso kukbaro. Karlis nga shira peju madani. Kunju chigi dang, chiran shira peju dangu mare, tsama nge chego sungni suchi yemidwa. Dikpa machis, di rangla dunga yungres. Dikpa se na, semjen la nö machis, jen la nö machis. Jen la nö ji na, ngamji mado, rangjin kun la, tsoba dunga yungre das. Jen tsama la, pemba chis. Chig mayimba, ni mayimba, tuma, yonsu zogba la pemba chiyagi, sim jaji mo kes. Di na nge chap ngon sigidwa. Ki ngai niziredo. Chu yorong merong, kunju yorong merong. Ngoma kunju de shirab diridwa.
When we think about what we might call kind of religious traditions or spirituality in the world, there can be some ideas that within all kind of spiritual traditions, I hasten to add, that we just close our eyes, kind of look kind of in a smiley way, kind of. We think, I'm putting my trust in something else, whatever form that may take. And we think, okay, I trust in you, and if I kind of close my eyes and I kind of act in a particularly holy way, then that will kind of purify me of everything I've done wrong. But who's doing the purification here? So this is what we might call kind of a blind faith. It's one within which kind of an understanding of things, or the development, if you like, of wisdom is not emphasized. Similarly, we may kind of read a book, and the book says, don't be bad, be good. And if you are a good person and you're not naughty, they'll not give you something special. We may act under that kind of advice, but in a way we're kind of fearing that if we step out from that advice, something bad might happen to us. So we consider then, okay, be good, do good, avoid negativity. What is meant by negativity? Harming others, somebody says to us. So don't harm others. Benefit them if you can, but at least don't harm. And be a good person. Okay. But here, there's no third party involved. This is simply the nature of things. A third party doesn't need to kind of dictate. If we understand the nature of things, we see the benefit of this.
세상 가서 남준들은 쌤들 직 틀어도 아저에 뒤에 자치 무지지 아 연수라 제마고 뜨마고 다 나랑 랑기 준당 나랑 랑지 인친거로 할리빈 논주 전부 말해 나서 주보니 파마 쿠라기 제기도 또거니 옌제버리 롭조니 갱갱이 제도 나랑서 가려야다 이 괜찮아 쉬어라 nga zui ge semi jindang de halebe nyok ta chawre do.
And so it's important to take our time to use our faculty of human intelligence to reflect upon then the mutually dependent nature of things. We are not as independent as we might like to believe. We think of ourselves as being independent, autonomous, perhaps even existing from our own side. But it's impossible, isn't it? We think about it. In a way, it's not something that really takes much investigation. When we think of our being, the aggregation of body and mind, the body came from our parents, didn't it? Mind came from the past. So there's no independent you. And the very fact that we're able to utilize this wonderful faculty of human education or human intellect is because we have, at least on a basic level, education. That didn't come naturally, it was given to us by others. But this is the nature of things. Again, it is not something that is dictated to us. If we bother to use introspection or to just observe the world around us, we see that this is the nature of things. Yet, the troublemaker, that which causes us, or the grief that we experience, if you like, is this kind of mental factor, if you like, of kind of projecting and then reifying and subsequently adhering to independence, where there's never been any independence.
라서 되니 강다르 츠드나 되니 가서다 남준도 조트라치로 레자 시비분조 자치모 가래 연나 내갑지 배주당야체 아니 자치주지 주고디야 가서 내갑지 배주당야지 근데 개치주다 약슈디 주와메와 아니 배 가르저다 린당다 되버디 아니 시럽피도 중하다 닝지피도 중하 잔주기 셈 라야데 당외고 지나는 가서 린당 치슈 가인세나 랑아 대왕 바직 예 대왕 바직 제 tum니지 아니 셈바장고 라야 되는도와 아니 가서 참만 티가라 베전지야지 티가라 샤주시나 다 약슈인바다.
And so when we consider the objects of the senses, things that we kind of see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and so forth, whatever form the kind of material world kind of takes, of course, we need to rely upon that. And of course, we should understand that any kind of benefit that we gain therethrough is something that is temporary. And similarly, we should, when we consider our form, our body, if you will. We should take care of our health. But it's important to understand that the objects of the senses and even our kind of body is something that is temporary. But what is really important is to develop something that is unchanging. Unchanging in the sense that it is simply the nature of things which doesn't change because it is nature. The understanding of the mutually dependent nature of things. Wisdom, if you like. This wisdom that we develop when we experience it, when we start to see things in a particular way. As mentioned, what arises therewith is a sense of kind of great compassion for others. And this isn't mixed with emotion. This is something that is genuine, that arises through simply seeing the nature of things. So accordingly then we talk of Bodhicitta, understanding the nature of things and that which manifests therefrom, this kind of great compassion. This, in terms of the subjective experience that we have, is something that is completely without dissatisfaction. It's what it is. The nature. It is in the nature of bliss, if you will. And this is something that arises not simply in relation to somebody and our particular perception of them, but rather universally to all sentient beings.
제가 가서디 가지고 다시 그 중고에 면도스 렌지 셈자치부터 카세연도스 셈자 치무디 카세송아이나 추켈렌론다 말레론 되는 가서 지 로체 가리나 부구이나다 다지 쉔바리나다 겜바이나다 오늘 전에 셈이 랑신디 하고야 지야데 빼미시 계지므래도 아니 디 베레제나 다지 시럽 라야당 닝지 라야디 거의 끝나 표시 당연지로 최중장에 참마나 제바 연주들이
So to understand the nature of things is something that causes, kind of, as I mentioned, metaphorically speaking, our mind to open. And this is, or rather one's mind or one's experience, if you like, is kind of open, becomes vaster, if you will, through understanding the nature of things. It doesn't have a particular recourse to a spiritual tradition, whether one is a practitioner thereof or otherwise. It doesn't really matter. What we are trying to what we are trying to develop, what we are trying to experience, is simply the nature of our mind, how it actually is. It is extremely important, I feel, to understand the nature of mind because it is the basis of all of our experience. And this understanding is something that everybody benefits from. Everybody can do in a way, regardless of age. Doesn't matter if you're young, old, really doesn't matter. Understanding the nature of mind and then putting it into practice is extremely important.
아주 겁날라나 매가 어디 가야 여마이 송도아 남준도 가서다 제 녀모 두숨라 홈체라니 된지 셈장부 정부들이 남산비주 동투어 말봐 대송장 셈장부 정부들이 갈래가 검지당 검지 나냐 왜 니수데 짜침부 제 시송아이나 아니 주바다야 되고 다 레라오 레라나 다 한바차고라 레마도지 강달 오네 추탐지 띵중이 비니스용안에 삼노다나 산지 좀 된디기 아니 로닌도 갑지 공을 송연주기 띵중기 대 코나니 송연디 되네 마스기 아니지 가르쳐오르다 셈제지 남도당 다 차당디 아니 매바지 다랑이 띵중기 대 코나니 전시에서와이나 차당이 로 용수조가 식주기도 차당이 로디 띵중기 니수잉안에 최탐지 에너지 Jundri nisu, Dudubi nisu, Che, De, Densumi ngani, Ani, Zang, Ngen, so the shut de amado, and Koran, Tembatuba, Dursa maybe Tone, Naso de Lulaina, Gedogore, Nadogore, Shedogore, Jedogore, Yatsarigore, Mark Hudogore. There's someone Tinjung Dudubi nisu inza, Chungdegore. Chungsa Koran Tinji Dudubi nisu inzane, Rangimeba, Kichi, Judugua. The Sungzang Sim Rakwatisu Rictisudea, and Simje Namne Sanjin de Yuanja Lovu Timin Dip, Tima Tese Sanji Ni, Sungu, Lovriji, and Ingasugi, Jujin Sopala Dene, Namdo Tisu Rictisute, and Tima Layada, Ni Lovruba is Layada. Simi Rangin Zoede Masugi, Rangju Taji, Kazoroko, Korangi Moam, Korangi Namba. Di, and better, Yoseba, Chimanda, and Derung Mahimba. To the number Kundu, that didn't touch him with Mojo Chiungdua. They are young, no need to go Koran Kang, no need to Yovade, Mojo Chio Yazani, and that's it, Chuluk Zena, Dick Nasugi, Donge Mandova, the Devan Devaji, Semji Yonsobala, Go Yovas, quiet, nobody read the door. 동해 예자와디 마릭바 당지 마릭바 리드도와 마릭바 나네야 다 가르조로 다 니루글로 몬데바 시샤 꾼라 마릭바세나 고응니스 마토니 다 릭바 예시세나 강 여바데 응니스 통데바 실로이 유창마 강 여바 코랑 응니스 가리 낭 셈이 니스 강 이바 응니스 통데바 Di ngui nisu ngani, ani jigila, jujin la teni, ti tensum jungji, chara nisu ngani, dur chara chini nisu ngani, kato ip chini nisu ngani, deni ji karjugorda, juso zangbo yona, deni sowa dewa, juso ngemba sano, sowa donge, layadako, rangji jumzenziredowa. 할레와 딘디 니숭아니 삼노 당와이나 아니 가서 미 창보다 장보 잠을링디 아니지 시디 랑가라 로야라 아니 할레비지 가져로다 시샤 자치무지 통서와
Now, it is important to understand that this understanding of the nature of things is possible. It may be that we perhaps feel, I understand this possibility, it's a little bit too difficult for me. And it's important, if we feel so, to understand why. In a way, when we consider ourselves, we are, each and every one of us, individuals who are very familiar with kind of giving into emotion, giving into negative mental traits, and most importantly, giving into this kind of distortion of reality, this kind of projection of autonomy, subsequent reification and adherence or grasping thereupon. So it's important to remind ourselves again and again that everything, all phenomena, if you like, everything is mutually dependent. It is dependently arisen, and it abides as something that is. It is dependently arisen, and it abides as something that is mutually dependent. This is then the nature of things. When we talk of the Buddha, Buddha means somebody who is awake. The Buddha is awake to the nature of things. And the Buddha's teaching fundamentally revolves around understanding the mutually dependent nature of things. Suchness, if you like, the way of things, if you prefer. This is what the Buddha realized. This is what caused the awakening, if you like, of Buddha. And this is then what the Buddha revealed in his teaching. So it is important to understand that no matter how real, independent, tangible even, these destructive states of mind are, obsession, desirous attachment, aversion, anger, hostility, etc. They are, in and of themselves, there because of various factors, wholesome or otherwise. When we consider everything, it is simply the effect of the coming together of inconceivable causes and conditions. And it's important that we reflect upon this. In the moment, indeed, in a very kind of crass way of looking at things, experience is momentary. It will pass. It's the changing nature of things that we all understand, even if we don't admit it to ourselves. And the reason things are momentary is because things are mutually dependent. They are not independent. We can understand this on a coarse level of our interaction with objects which we relate to through the sense doors. When we understand the mutual dependence of an experience that comes about through our seeing a particular object, for example, we understand that on a rough level, a coarse level, if you like. But it's important to then relate that to mind itself, or to consciousness, if you will. There is a famous citation that I'll read. I'll relate to you rather. All sentient beings are awake. What does that mean? All sentient beings are Buddha. But they don't realize they are Buddha. Why? Because they are under the influence of these obscuring factors, disturbing emotions, negative states of mind, negative mental traits, habitual tendencies, etc., all of which have come about through this distortion of reality. Accordingly, if we remove the obscuring factor, when we see the nature of things as it is, that is the meaning of Buddha. So this is an extremely important introduction. We can say, an introduction to the nature of things, introduction to the nature of mind, if you will. Here, when we consider all sentient beings wish to be happy, all sentient beings wish to be free of suffering, discomfort, dissatisfaction, etc. It is important for us to consider, in light of the understanding of mutual dependence, what brings about this suffering or this dissatisfaction, this discomfort that we experience. It is based upon a habit of entertaining these negative or destructive states of mind. These negative or destructive states of mind find their cause in this fundamental distortion of reality that we often call ignorance. Ignorance here then simply means to misinterpret, to misunderstand the nature of things. So if we correct our understanding, if we remove this distorting factor, by removing it, what we have in place of this fundamental distortion of reality or ignorance is wisdom, an understanding of the nature of things. With that, there is no longer any bed, if you like, from which the kind of seeds of disturbing emotion can emerge. And so it's important then to become familiar with the natural state, the nature of things. This is in and of itself referred to as kind of Ripa Yeshi in Tibetan, which means then this kind of fundamental understanding of awareness. This fundamental understanding which is in and of itself the innermost subtle nature of experience. And it, in and of itself, is awake. It is just that we don't recognize its awakened nature is obscured by our entertaining through familiarity these destructive or disturbing, distorting, if you will, states of mind. And so it is important then that it should we wish to be free of discomfort, if we would like to have kind of peace of mind, both temporarily and ultimately to awaken, what we need to develop within ourselves is simply a familiarity with the nature of things, to avoid blindly, in a way, adhering to these destructive states of mind and thereby bringing about the dissatisfaction that we experience and that ultimately we would like to be free of. And so accordingly, when we talk of peace, peace is a subjective experience, and it comes about simply through understanding the nature of things.
So, then shirap pyodo chungwa ninji pyodo chungwa ji tamshi chenyin pyobe pamo chung chung ji tamshi chewa de che nama tsinzik chenyin de la chonghan la yoba tang an chilo ni senyin changman lo la gatin che yuwa yin thakwa to la da Jamyang Centre da dini da chulu zi riksu ma chewa peche ani naka gocha yusa re an che nama soy kochik tang ani jabjong ani samji mechawa chisha changma tuji che ani shirabda ninji gi rolling di anga cha samji mechawa ji karju gorda sonam chimura chare di gi ani ji karju gorda nimbala nanda an di gi dungde lawai nanda di changma lo ani zawli tenji jibu thamba ani zamling kyun da pendo chenye ji jibu thamba changma la ko che ten dang nimuk trukse jiwa dang 아니 지 semjing 장바다 제벨로 줄지 몰람 지르지 아니 정말로 다시 될래 두지체 고체리.
And so we've been speaking about kind of wisdom a lot, and through understanding of the nature of things, that which will designate wisdom, therethrough comes a great compassion, and thereby peace. And so I'd like to thank you, all of you who are gathered here in the room, and also all of you who are gathered around the world via Zoom. Thank you all for your interest in the development of this understanding or kind of wisdom, and in particular, the event here today was organized, as mentioned at the beginning, by 9 different Buddhist groups. So I'd like to thank you for your mutual kind of cooperation, bringing about this event. And as we've been talking about kind of wisdom and compassion, the subjective experience of peace, etc., I'm sure that hereby we've gathered a huge amount of positive potential or merit. And I would like to now, for all of us, to dedicate this to all sentient beings throughout the world. That kind of conflicts may end. And conflicts always begin with a misunderstanding, so that misunderstanding ends. And that everybody, through understanding the nature of things, develops a genuine kind of appreciation for an altruistic concern for others. And so let us dedicate then the merit of our time together. And thank you very much. Tashi dele.
Thakwardola kejur nanenda gelon shonla kinji zangsum mane tajibore gatinche ani jinda kejur yozo chamalo gatinche tashi dele. Thank you.
So thank all of you once again.